Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel, The Eclectic Reader. So today I would like to talk about the books that I selected for the Booktube spin, which is a challenge hosted by Rick McDonald. Now, I know that Rick already did the spin and selected the two numbers, but I made my list before watching his video so that I wasn't biased by that. So what I'm going to do is first read you the 20 books that I selected. Then I'll tell you the two numbers that he spun and what those two books are. And then I will choose one of those two books to read during the challenge. I'm supposed to read both books, but Rick did say that it's okay if we read only one of the books. And as I'm trying to ease my way back into Booktube, I'd rather just read one of the two books. Now, the reason why I wanted to participate in the Booktube spin is because I was involved in the Classics Club blog spin years ago. I used to participate in a lot of the events hosted by the Classics Club blog. And it's the Classics Club spin which inspired Rick's challenge. So it's really cool to see Booktube also, getting on board. And I wanted to participate. So here are the 20 books that I chose. So the first is Duncan Wood by William Horwood. Duncan Wood is the first in a fantasy trilogy that appears to feature woodland creatures. Now, I'm really interested in reading the first book, but I can't find it anywhere. It appears that it's out of print, except on Amazon. So I think I'm going to just get an ebook or a physical copy from Amazon and read it. But I've been browsing all of the used bookstores around here, hoping that somebody carries Duncan Wood, but I haven't been able to find it, and it just really appeals to me. The moles of Duncan Wood are a varied lot. There are the aggressive West Siders, the secretive and sickly Marchenders, the independent East Siders. Despite their differences, all are members of the same once proud and famous mole system, and all are now tyrannized by Mandrake, a mole so powerful and senselessly destructive that his name seems a curse on those who utter it. This just sounds wonderful. It gives me C.S. Lewis vibes, but I think this is more for adults, so I really look forward to it. Number 2, Double Indemnity by James M. Cain. So Double Indemnity is a classic of the noir genre. Some years ago, I read The Maltese Falcon, and which is by Dashiell Hammett, and I then watched the film, and I really loved the book and the film, so I've been meaning to read more noir fiction. So Double Indemnity, it says, tautly narrated and excruciatingly suspenseful. Double Indemnity gives us an X-ray view of guilt, of duplicity, and of the kind of obsessive, loveless love that devastates everything it touches. So that sounds really good, and I do hope to read that. 3, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot. So this book is a work of nonfiction about Henrietta Lacks, who was a poor Southern African-American tobacco farmer. And it's about her cells, which were used in growing the first human cells in culture. And her cells were used without her consent, I believe, and her family, I don't think, was paid. There seems to be a lot of ethical issues behind the use of her cells. So I'm really interested in learning more about Henrietta Lacks and just the injustices surrounding her case. 4 is The King Must Die by Mary Renault. So I've never read Mary Renault. I know that she is a very well-received historical fiction novelist. And this story actually follows a mythological figure, Theseus, who made his way through the very famous labyrinth and killed the Minotaur. So I'm really interested in reading a historical fiction that is about a mythological figure, because then it raises questions about both history and myth. 5 is The Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison, which is a classic of African-American fiction. As he journeys from the Deep South to the streets and basements of Harlem, from a horrifying battle royale where black men are reduced to fighting animals, to a communist rally where they are elevated to the status of trophies, Ralph Ellison's nameless protagonist ushers readers into a parallel universe that throws our own into harsh and even hilarious relief. So this is another fat book on the list. Duncan Wood is also pretty large. Number 6 is The Blythesdale Romance by Nathaniel Hawthorne. I was one of the very strange students in high school who actually liked The Scarlet Letter, so I really do hope to enjoy The Blythesdale Romance as well. And this book is about a group of utopians. I do know that Nathaniel Hawthorne lived in a utopian community for a while. I'm pretty sure he was, interested in the transcendentalist movement. So it should be interesting to read a book that is probably, at least in part, based on his own experiences and philosophical interests. Number 7 is a book that literally everyone has read except me, and that's The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. I have the vaguest idea of what this book is about. I know that it involves a portrait, and I'm really not interested in reading the blurb because I want to be surprised to the degree that I can be surprised by a book that is so famous and so widely read. 8 is Saga Land by Richard Fidler and Kari Gislason. So Saga Land appears to be part history and part memoir. Goodreads says, a new friendship, an unforgettable journey, a beautiful and bloody history. This is Iceland as you've never read it before. Broadcaster Richard Fidler and author Kari Gislason are good friends. They share a deep attachment to the sagas of Iceland, the true stories of the first Viking families who settled on that remote island in the Middle Ages. These are tales of blood feuds, of dangerous women, and people who are compelled to kill the ones they love the most. So it appears to be a mix of Icelandic history, the history of the sagas, and then Fidler and Gislason's actual experiences in Iceland. So, sounds really interesting. 9, Crocodile on the Sandbank by Elizabeth Peters. Now, last year, I actually started reading cozy mysteries. Cozy mysteries are a hit and miss genre for me. I find that they tend to be poorly written, or at least poorly edited, which makes me feel really bad for the author, especially when they're traditionally published. But I really enjoy them. They're an escapist read. So Crocodile on the Sandbank is actually the first of the Amelia Peabody series, which I've been meaning to get into, by Elizabeth Peters. And I bought the first book in the series recently. That's the first book. So I really look forward to reading it and hope that the mix of cozy and history will really be a great experience. 10, A Prayer for Owen Meany by John Irving. I have put off this book for so long. It is another huge novel, but I know that it's going to be very powerful. Reading the comments on Goodreads, I get this impression that it's just one of those life-changing books that will, that is often on people's favorite lists. So I would really like to get to that. 11-year-old Owen Meany, playing in a Little League baseball game in Gravesend, New Hampshire, hits a foul ball and kills his best friend's mother. Owen doesn't believe in accidents, he believes he is God's instrument. What happens to Owen after that 1953 foul is both extraordinary and terrifying. At moments, a comic, self-deluded victim, but in the end, the principal tragic character in a divine plan. That's so interesting. It almost sounds like a tragedy, like the tragic hero who is destined to do things, and then there are these consequences that are unavoidable. But that also means the tragic hero has a fatal flaw, and I'm really interested in knowing what Owen Meany's fatal flaw is. This sounds like a really interesting novel. I hope to get to it. 11, The Toymakers by Robert Dinsdale. Now this is a very different kind of book. It's fun. I don't think it's a children's book. It might be YA, but it's perfect for the Christmas season, which has just passed. However, I'm still kind of in the Christmas spirit, so I'm up for it. It is 1917, and London has spent years in the shadow of the First World War. In the heart of Mayfair, though, there is a place of hope, a place where children's dreams can come true, where the impossible becomes possible. That place is Papa Jack's Toy Emporium. Oh, that sounds so much fun. Number 12, The Idiot by Fyodor Dostoevsky. I started reading The Brothers Karamazov some years ago and then abandoned it after a couple hundred pages. But been meaning to read The Idiot first. It seems like more up my alley than the Brothers Karamazov or Crime and Punishment. So I would really like to read The Idiot first. Returning to Russia from a sanatorium in Switzerland, the Christ-like epileptic Prince Mishkin finds himself enmeshed in a tangle of love, torn between two women, the notorious kept woman Nastasia and the pure Aglaia, both involved in turn with the corrupt, money-hungry Gania. So that seems pretty interesting. 13 is Julian of Norwich, Theologian, by Dennis Turner. I read Dennis Turner's biography of Thomas Aquinas and I was blown away. Aquinas was not a theologian that I cared a lot about prior to reading Dennis Turner's biography. If you don't know, Thomas Aquinas was a 13th century Dominican scholastic, and he's seen as the father of scholasticism. He's an incredibly influential theologian and just thinker in the history of Western Christianity in general, but particularly in the Roman Catholic Church. And Aquinas, because of his style and just the Aristotelianism of his philosophy, didn't really appeal to me up until I read his book. And what Turner does so well is talk about his theology within the historical context in which he did this work. He wrote the Summa at the University of Paris at a time when there was a lot of conflict between various orders, conflict between the secular priests and the religious priests, that is, priests who belong to religious orders. And he talks about how all of these various conflicts influence Aquinas' theology. I thought it was very well researched, but also easy to read, because Aquinas is very challenging to read, and biographers tend to get bogged down in the details. So I really look forward to reading his biography of Julian of Norwich, a very different figure. She was a 14th century mystic, but having read her visions, known as the Revelation of Divine Love, I do know that they are very theological visions. And it's also important that female mystics be viewed as the theologians that they were, despite the fact that they weren't professional theologians like Aquinas or Scotus or any of these other medieval scholastics. 14, Word by Word, The Secret Life of Dictionaries by Kory Stamper. I think it's Olive at A Book Olive who recommended this book, and it's basically about the Merriam-Webster dictionary and how words end up in dictionaries. And I believe that Kory Stamper has worked for the Merriam-Webster dictionary, so it is part lexicography and part memoir. 15, Tumbling by Diane Whetstone-McKinney. Tumbling vividly captures a tightly knit African-American neighborhood in South Philadelphia during the 40s and 50s. Its central characters, Herbie and Noon, are a loving but unconventional couple whose marriage remains unconsummated for many years as Noon struggles to repossess her sexuality after a brutal attack in her past. While she seeks salvation in the church, Herbie gains sexual gratification in the arms of a bewitching jazz singer named Ethel, a woman who profoundly affects both Noon's and Herb's lives when she leaves with them first a baby girl and then later a 5-year-old named Liz. Sounds really interesting. So it's about family and family connections and love and repressed desires. At least that's what it sounds like. It sounds like a really interesting book. It was recommended by a booktuber some years back, and I put it on my TBR, and for the past few years I've thought about reading it, but I've never gotten to it, so I'm hoping to get to that as well. 16, another work of nonfiction, The Invention of Nature, Alexander von Humboldt's New World by Andrea Wolf. As you might have guessed from some of my previous videos, I am very interested in nature writing, and not so much memoir nature writing, but books written by biologists who work in the conservation of North American wildlife in particular. But I'm interested in the biographies of various scientists and naturalists, and Alexander von Humboldt was one of those naturalists. So I really would like to read this book. It is a pretty large biography. 17 is Cold Comfort Farm by Stella Gibbons. That's a children's book that a lot of booktubers have loved. It's a classic. I don't really know a whole lot about it, so let's see what Goodreads has to say. It's a wickedly funny portrait of British rural life in the 1930s. Flora Posty, a recently orphaned socialite, moves in with her country relatives, the gloomy Starcatters, of cold comfort form and become enmeshed in a web of violent emotions, despair, and scheming until Flora manages to set things right. It gives me Anne of Green Gables vibes. Let's hope it's as good. 18 is Sabriel by Garth Nix. I think this would count as YA. It's another classic of children's literature. It is the first of the Old Kingdom series. Sent to a boarding school in Anklesteer as a young child, Sabriel has had little experience with the random power of free magic or the dead who refuse to stay dead in the Old Kingdom. So it's a boarding school novel about a magician. I mean, I love boarding school novels about magicians. I feel like a lot of us do. I am of the generation of Harry Potter, so any book that deals with magicians at a boarding school definitely appeals to me. 19, a nonfiction book, Lincoln at Gettysburg by Garry Wills. This is the book, I believe, that gave him the Pulitzer Prize. So Garry Wills shows how Lincoln reached back to the Declaration of Independence to write the greatest speech in the nation's history. I chose this book because I'm very interested in rhetoric, and I think that Wills here will analyze the rhetoric of his address. So I really look forward to reading that. And number 20, Species, A History of the Idea by John Wilkins. So I'm currently a PhD student in French, but when I was an undergrad, I studied both French and biology. And while I always loved biology, I realized that I wasn't interested in being an experimental scientist. I was very interested in the philosophy of science, and particularly the philosophy of biology. Questions like, what is a species? And the answer is not so simple. So I'm really interested in looking at how the concept of species developed and the history of it. It is an academic book, so I don't think it's widely available, but it is available through my university library. So those are the 20 books that I had chosen, and the two numbers were number 8 and number 13. So number 8 was Sagaland by Richard Fidler and Kari Gislason, and number 13 was Julian of Norwich, Theologian by Dennis Turner. I will definitely be reading number 13, Julian of Norwich, Theologian by Dennis Turner. I just loved his book on Thomas Aquinas, and I think that this one is going to be just as fantastic, and I'm so glad to see someone really talking about mystics as the theologians they were. Let me know what books you will be reading for this spin, if you will be participating, or if you have read any of the other books on my list, please let me know. Thank you everybody for watching, and I will talk to you later. Bye now.